Hello, my friends. Thanks for joining us again right here on Kardec Radio. This is Spiritism, a closer look. Once again, we are here every Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. I am Luiz Lima, your host for tonight, broadcasting from Orlando, Florida. Tonight's topic, tonight we are going to take a closer look at Christology. Yeah, Christology. Well, what is that, right? Well, it's an interesting subject. So hopefully by the end of tonight's program, you're going to take valuable information with you. It is for us Spiritists, although for initially it doesn't seem like that, but it is. So let's go. Christology. What is that? Okay, it's composed of two pieces, Christ, which is Christ, and ology. Ology means knowledge, something that you're going to study to acquire knowledge. So Christology is knowledge about the Christ. Well, what exactly is that? Because, Jesus, the Christ, said so many things, did so many things, but this is a very specific study. Christology is very specific. So we could define in more details Christology as being the part of theology that studies the person of Christ and his work. Oh, two things included here: the study of the person of Christ and his work. Many authors divide this in two parts, or they give it two different words. Christology being the study of the person of Christ, and the works of Christ receive a different name called soteriology. Soteriology studies salvation as taught by the Christ. So for us here, we don't need to go this far. We need to understand what this is and how it matters to us Spiritists. So in very simple words, what is Christology? The study of the nature of the Christ. Was he human? Was he not? Was he divine, fully divine, half human, half divine? That's Christology. And again, it has two aspects: the study of the person and the work. Why does it matter to us Spiritists? Why does it matter? Why should I study that? Why is it important? Why is it important for us Spiritists to study and understand Christology? Well, here's a glance of what we're going to do here. To understand other belief systems, not that we want to convert ourselves or learn deeply, no, but to understand, we need to understand how they see the Christ. That makes a difference on how the belief systems work based on how they see Christ. Well, for example, in a Spiritist center, many times, and I can tell you this stories, several stories, it is not uncommon to receive people at times from other belief systems that show up because they're looking for some sort of help, some sort of consolation, if you will. So they heard about Spiritism, or somebody mentioned to them, somebody said, oh, I go to this place, so you should go too. So they'll show up at our doors in the Spiritist center. So it is easier for us to guide that person, to provide, quotes, the services that they expect, meaning the consolation, the help they expect. It is easier for us to do that if we understand where they're coming from. So they come from, let's just say, Buddhism. What is Buddhism? What do they think? What is their general line of think? They come from Judaism. They come from Catholicism. So it would be nice to know, the bare minimum about these religions, especially those within Christianity. How do they see Jesus? Is Jesus this great Savior? Is it not? It is important because it makes a difference. That is actually what makes denominations within Christianity be different from one another. So the knowledge about it solidifies our knowledge about the Christ. So how does this thing started? Studying the nature of the Christ. It starts right after Jesus' death. Right after his death, Christianity, to be, right, is going to go through several phases and influences. The first batch of influences is paganism. So he receives a lot of pagan influences, especially when Emperor Constantine in 312, when he took office, he was the ruling emperor, and he made Christianity the official religion within the Roman Empire. And if that becomes the religion, the official religion, you better know about it. And they didn't know anything because these rulers, these Roman rulers, they were all pagans. So what they do is they started to attach pagan values and rituals to Christianity. So with time, like I said, this starts in 312, 313. With time, throughout the centuries, the whole thing starts to fall apart because you're drifting away from the original teachings of Jesus, in which Christianity is based on, or at least should be based on. So think about this. When you get away from the center of its creation, which is Judea, Jerusalem, that area, when you get away from it, you're going to take the faith, you're going to take that into places that have a completely different culture. For example, Greece or Rome. It's a completely different cultural setup. Very much like, for example, food. Let's say Chinese food. Chinese food in China is not necessarily the same Chinese food we get in the restaurant around the corner here, because it's the one we get here. It's adapted, tailored for the American taste. So there's a cultural component in there. Same thing here. So cultural components start to attach themselves to each place as the Roman Empire, as the Christianity goes across the Roman Empire. So the common beliefs, they start to fall apart. Because now the guy in Greece doesn't believe exactly the same thing that the guy in Judea and the guy in North Egypt. Things fall apart. Religious groups start to drift away from each other. And one of the main reasons why that is so, it's because they understand the nature of the Christ differently. Not every group, not everyone understands the same way. So I want to show you a graphic here. We're not going to study the whole graphic. That would take us hours and hours. But it's just to bring to our eyes visually how complicated it gets. Okay? So let me place this here and we can follow along. So what we have here is, let's say, for example, that the question is, do you think, this is in the early days of Christianity, okay? This is early Christians. Do you believe that Jesus was human or divine? Well, there are three answers. I think he was human, I think he was divine, or I think he was both. Those are the three answers. If you believe flatly that he was human, nothing else, nobody special, didn't do anything different than anybody else, there was a group that took that belief within themselves. They were called the Ebionites. If you believe that Jesus was fully 100% divine, there was another group called the Docetists or Docetism. And there's other groups that will say, no, he's not human 100% nor divine 100%. He's a combination of things. So he's both. And now, hold on. Both, but now there's another question. How is this both? So here's another question. How is the essence of Jesus? Essence being the divine part. So there are three options. And you see the words here. First of all is heterousia, meaning hetero, different, right? So Jesus is different than God, his essence. That's one possibility. Another possibility is homoiousia, as you see there, where it is similar but not the same as God the Father. And those groups created a sect called Arianism. You see, Arianism does not have the same beliefs that the two above, Ebionites and Docetists. It's different. And there's a third option here in which God, and the Father, as they call, and Jesus have exactly the same essence. And that would be the last thing here, homoousia. Now, hold on. If it's the same essence, then there's another question. You see how complicated it's getting? And the question is, how is the association between these two, the human part and the divine part? How is the association? So if it's distinct individuals, that's one sect called Nestorianism. Or it's the same individual. The human and divine is the same individual. But hold on, there's another question now. How is the physical aspect of this union? And you have different answers. Are they combined or are they distinct? If they are combined, how did they combine? What is the method that they were putting together, per se? And that generates different sub-belief systems, let's put it this way. And if it's not distinct, then there's another question, even more. What's the intent of this combination, human-divine? You see, we're not going to go through this in details, but you see how complicated this is. That's early Christianity. In the early days of Christianity, and it was already that complicated. We're talking about less than 100 years after Jesus' death. So you bring this along for 2,000 years, you end up with 41,000 denominations of Christianity. That's what we have today. Because, different people understand this in different ways. And you saw just the nature of the Christ, how many sects had to be created, how many different visibilities were in place. So Christianity has several branches today, Catholics, Protestants, Evangelical Mormons, Gnostic, Orthodox, Anglicans, and it goes on and on and on. One of these denominations is Spiritism, one of them. So each denomination, each of these, like Catholics and Evangelicals and all of those that I mentioned here, and many more, of course, they each have their own Christology, meaning how they see Jesus, the Christ, how they see the Christ. Now, that should be clearly stated or defined within their reference literature. So if you follow a certain belief system, a certain sect, certain denomination of Christianity, you should know where to look for to find out how that particular denomination sees the Christ. Is it just human? Is it not? Is it 20-80%, 70-30, whatever it is? Where is that defined within the literature for that particular denomination? And it's going to be different for everyone. So let's take one, for example, not being Spiritism, because then we're going to compare Spiritism and you're going to see where we want to get to. So let's just take Catholicism, for example. What is the reference literature for Catholics? The Bible. So the Bible, somewhere in the Bible, you should be able to find the Catholic Christology. It should be very explicit for every belief system, for every denomination. our Christology is this. But it isn't that way. In most of these denominations, what you're going to find is a mix of things, fragmented, and you are going to have to take your conclusion yourself. And that's complicated, because in analyzing and taking your own conclusion, you might be creating just another branch of that particular denomination. You see, if there's no black and white information, this is us. This is here, us, our Christology. But if you have to guess yourself based on, this part of the text says this other part says this, if I put these two together, or these four pieces together, yeah. But that's you doing it. It's not clearly stated by the denomination. So, for example, Catholics, they do not think, that's not right and wrong, that's not criticism. Please, 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 please. This is just analysis of what Christology is. So Catholics, for example, they state that Spiritism is not part of Christianity. Okay, so the question is, we respect their opinion, first of all, and the question is, why not? I want to know why not. And they will say that we do not see Christ the way that Christ is, meaning the way their Christology was assembled. Their Christology is something that is called the doctrine of the Trinity, in which God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit are one thing. This is their Christology. So every other denomination that does not believe in that, in the doctrine of the Trinity, for Catholics will not be considered part of Christianity. So they do not consider us, Spiritists, part of Christianity, because we do not believe in the doctrine of the Trinity. Otherwise, God would have been defeated at the cross, and he wasn't. Now, we're taking Catholicism as an example, so let's continue with the thought. Where is that written for Catholics? Like I said, it's in the Bible. Where in the Bible? It's on the first epistle, 1 John, chapter 5, items or verses 7 and 8. The problem is these verses, verse 8, which would have been the clear black and white description of their Christology, verse 8, was an insertion to the original Bible. It showed up initially after the first translation to the Latin, called the Latin Vulgata, which was done in 384. So at about the late 400s, early 500s, this line starts to show up, defining the Christology. And it will not be in any of the Greek translations until the early 1500s, because it was just a later addition. It wasn't on the original text. So in 1927, the Pope at the time, Pius XI, he stated that this matter on this particular passage, 1 John chapter 5, verses 7 and 8, was to be put under dispute, because there was not a general agreement, and it had not been seen in the early versions of the Bible. In 1979, so very close to our days now, the idea of this Trinity as it is, this passage is called Johanneum Comma. So in 1979, the Johanneum Comma was removed from the Bible after the Second Vatican Council. So you will not find this anymore on any Bible after 1979. However, the King James versions still carry that. They did not take it out. They refused to take it out. So enough about this. Coming back, they have their Christology written somewhere. We're not going to say if it's right or wrong. It's written in the Bible as a direct piece of text or indirect, that you have to read several parts and understand what it means. But it is there. Okay, so us, Spiritists, where is our Spiritist Christology written? How do I get to know what is the position of Spiritism in regards to the nature of the Christ? How do I get there? For us, this is defined in the 5th book of the codification, the book of Genesis, chapter 15. The first part of chapter 15 is called the superiority of Jesus' nature. It's about 2.5 pages. I'm going to bring 2 of the paragraphs so we can look at real quick. So here's the first of them. As a man, so he's talking about Jesus, the nature of the Christ. So as a man, so meaning the human part, the human flesh, a man walking down Galilee, walking down through Jerusalem and so and so. As a man, he had the bodily composition of corporeal beings. What is that? He had cells, he had bones, he had hair, he had eyes, corporeal composition of the same as me and you. He had nail, okay? Continues. But as a pure spirit, which you and I are not, but as a pure spirit, detached from matter, meaning the spirit part only, apart from the physical body, he would have lived the spirit life more than a corporeal life, the weaknesses of which he would not have had. Meaning, corporeal life, the weakness of the flesh, as we humans refer to, he didn't have those because he was this elevated spirit, pure spirit, at a much higher level than we are still today. And it continues, the superiority of Jesus over other humans. Okay, so Jesus was better than you and me, and he was not linked to the particularities of his body. So he had nothing to do with bones, cells, hair, nail. It had nothing to do with that, but to those of his spirit, which dominated matter completely. We don't. You and I, we don't. And that of his perispirit, which was drawn from the most quintessential portion of Earth's fluid. You and I have a perispirit, which is drawn from Earth's fluid, but it's not the quintessential portion, but more like gross matter, almost. And that is where the difference is. It is in the spirit. It's not in the bodies. So if I mention to you the word man, think of a man. You're not going to think of a dead body. You're going to think of a person that you imagine. It could be a family member, or it could be yourself, or something that you just imagine, as I said. But somebody who is alive, meaning there's a spirit and a physical body. So he was much better than we are. He was much more advanced than we are. And that is the difference. So he was not fully divine. He was not 30% divine. We all have a divine spark within. But he was not God on the flesh, nothing like this, from the Spiritist point of view. This is our Christology. Jesus was a man, physical person like you and me, but he was a spirit so much more advanced. That was really hard for us to even comprehend fully and follow him. That is the difference. We don't see Jesus as fully divine, nothing like this, adopted by God, like the Docetists, nothing like this. Our Christology is very clear. Again, it's on the book of Genesis, on chapter 15, in the first part of the chapter, items 1 and 2. Now, with this, another discussion comes along. We're not going to discuss, I'm just going to mention because it makes sense. If we are discussing, let me rephrase it, if we were to discuss this further for hours and days and maybe months, another thing comes along with it. I have to drag another subject into the equation, because if we are discussing his nature, I need to look at how he was born, right? I need to look at how what happened at birth. Was this a supernatural birth from a Virgin Mary? Really quick, the idea of a Virgin Mary, of Immaculate Conception, that was initially brought up by the Church in the Council of Ephesus in 431. What is a council? It's a group of incarnate, imperfect people that can serve the church, yeah, but imperfect still, that they decide on something. That's what a council is. Okay, we need to decide this. So in this Council of Ephesus in 431, the idea that Mary was virgin came up. Nothing ever before was being mentioned. So this thing goes around. Not everybody agrees. So it goes up and down. It rolls around year after year after year after year. And it was not until the year 553 that the Second Council of Constantinople set the record straight. And then as of that point, 553, the Virgin Mary was generally accepted within the church. So this, from this day on, it did gain momentum, and it still does, right? And it became this strong belief within certain denominations within Christianity. Not all of them, but it did gain momentum. And it's something that makes sense to be discussed, because if we're discussing, if Jesus is human and and divine or so, how was he born? How was the conception? So one thing brings the other. We're not going to get into that. It's not the purpose today. If we were ever to pursue the subject, is more for curiosity, I would say, because it doesn't add anything to our Spiritist studies other than curiosity. And it's also good to know history in general, studying these Vatican councils, all these things. It's historical information, to say the least. So, Christology. Jesus was a pure spirit living in the flesh among us. No God incarnated, nothing like this. Not for us Spiritists. This is our Christology. I really encourage you to go to the book, Genesis chapter 15. Read the first part, items 1 and 2. It's about 2.5 pages. It's not too much. But you have to read carefully. You have to be concentrated on what you read. It might take you 1 hour to read and reread certain paragraphs to grasp the idea to the level that we should. Okay, so I really encourage you to do this. So thanks for joining us tonight, and we will be here next Wednesday at 7 p.m. with another edition of Spiritism